Mr. Chairman, my name is Kevin Satterlee. I'm the Vice President of Campus Operations and General Counsel at Boise State University. I have some prepared testimony regarding many of the questions that have come up regarding what we will do to change campus security if the bill is enacted. However, a quick diversion. I think we have to address one of the items that came up right before the break, and that is the testimony by the representative from the Attorney General's office. I think we have to think very cautiously about what was said, because a review of what was said was essentially a dodge of the question of whether or not open carry is addressed by this legislation. So far today we have heard, in fact, in his testimony, he said, well, if you take some assumptions, this is where the bill could go. We've heard so far that there is history and tradition in how it will be interpreted. We now have assumptions on how it will be interpreted. We also have heard testimony today from the Dean of the University of Idaho Law School, Don Burnett, who is also a former Idaho Court of Appeals judge. We've heard testimony from a former general counsel to one of Idaho's largest private employers. Essentially, what you have, at best, is a bill that is ambiguous on that point. If this bill moves forward, you will be sending into law a bill that, even before it gets anywhere, is already ambiguous. And that's difficult for all of us. We all know that there are many sides to issues and we can disagree, but we think what we have to have is a law that is clear, that it takes a side on those issues, and this one does not. And the representative of the Attorney General's office essentially said that in his testimony. It isn't clear how this bill addresses that issue of open carry. And as long as that is open, as has come up in committee testimony so far today, we'll be sending a bill that it will put the universities in Idaho into litigation to resolve it. I think that the better answer is to hold the bill and then try to come to a consensus on that language. Even if one side doesn't prevail, at least we'll know what it says, and that is important. But forcing us into a court challenge to resolve what can't be resolved here, I don't think is the right answer. To what I was prepared to testify to today, how does this change campus security? That has come up many times. Let's start with this presumption now. Because the university bans firearms now, completely, there's a presumption that if a gun is on campus, there's a problem. It's a bad gun, if you will. I apologize for that phrase. Maybe it's a bad guy with a gun. So a gun on campus right now yields an immediate response of armed police force. We had it happen. There was a call about 3 years ago in our College of Engineering on a Saturday that there was a man with a rifle in the building. Within seconds, not minutes, but within seconds, Boise police officers were on scene. Within less than 2 minutes, there were more than 20 police officers swarming the building. Why? Because there was a gun on campus. Why do we do that? We do that because at Boise State we implemented every one of the post-shooting Virginia Tech recommendations from the commission. And one of the first recommendations was immediate armed police response to a report of a gun on campus. That's what didn't happen at Virginia Tech. That's what we all do now. At Boise State and all of our sister institutions, if there is a call of a gun on campus, the police department with armed police respond immediately and in force. We think that's the right thing. What happens if this bill goes into effect? First, a bill goes into effect, and if there's a report of a gun on campus, we stop and ask ourselves, well, is it one of the good guys with a gun, or is it one of the bad guys with a gun? That delay, this bill will ask us to delay the armed police response to a gun on campus call. That delay will cost lives. This delay will say, send someone out to ask that person whether or not they have the appropriate licensure to be carrying that firearm on campus. Only if we get the wrong answer should we respond in force. So what changes will we make to campus security? We now have to arm our campus security to be prepared to actively confront people with firearms on campus, because that's now their job. Right now, that isn't what we do when we have a gun. We call in trained, armed law enforcement. We will now take our campus security and say, your job, confront people with guns and find out their intentions. You want us to have people who are trained in firearms and are armed themselves to make that confrontation. In order to do that, we will have to hire and train people who are trained law enforcement professionals to be that responder. That's how our campuses will have to respond. The issue of venues, sporting venues, arenas, and dormitories. If we are now given a standard by the legislature in law that we have to prohibit weapons in Bronco Stadium, in the Kibbe Dome, in Holt Arena, the testimony from the representative from the NRA said the reason they were willing to put in that exception into the law was there was an expectation that we would be doing appropriate searches to keep guns out of those venues. Well, we've implemented the post-Virginia Tech rulings for the right reason. What this legislation is going to do is put a new burden of liability on the institutions because it's setting a new standard of care. Plaintiffs' lawyers will love this because the standard of care is now going to be an expectation on the universities that they have completely made it so that those venues have no firearms. The member of the Fraternal Order of Police said earlier the reason they're okay with no firearms in public schools and in airports and things like that is there's some expectation that people are searched upon entry, go through metal detectors, single point of entry, etc. I disagree with that because I don't think there's a single public school in Idaho that fits that definition. But if there's a ban on weapons in the stadium, it will be because there's an expectation that what he said is what we will do. The only way they will feel safe without weapons in Bronco Stadium is if we have metal detectors, bag searches, armed security, and we heighten that. That's why we have to spend the money to respond. It's also the reason that this bill creates a problem for us liability-wise is it creates a new legal standard. No, it doesn't say it, but believe me, the plaintiff's lawyers will find it. That we have a standard of care in those venues, in the dormitories. Single point of entry with armed guards and metal detectors. That's what the Fraternal Order of Police said makes them comfortable in not carrying their firearms. This bill sets that standard for our dormitories. If we don't do it, we will have a problem. And this is the major point of the problem. On page 4 of the bill, the new indemnity immunity provision. In lines 16 through 18, the last 3 lines of the bill, very clearly state that if we have a policy on our campuses that specifically allow or not prohibit, I'm quoting from the bill in line 17, if we have policies that specifically allow firearms or do not prohibit them, we are immune from lawsuits under state law. That's great. Except that this law also puts a standard in place that in our dormitories and in our stadiums, that shouldn't be the case. There are no firearms in dorms and stadiums. The immunity provision will not apply. So you've created a standard that if we don't screen out all of the weapons from the dorms and all of the weapons from those venues, we are not immune. You've set a standard that we won't be able to live up to without a massive ramp up in equipment, personnel, and training of our campus security. The real on-the-ground net effect of this bill, I'll leave to many other people who can testify whether they like guns or whether they don't, whether they think they apply or don't. The real on-the-ground net effect and fiscal impact of this bill is that if your campuses in this state do not ramp up to meet this standard, if you do not appropriate the money to do that, soon you'll be appropriating the money to pay off the lawsuits for the failure to do that. I don't want the legislature to pass a bill that sets up the universities to immediately be in court, and that's what this bill does. We implemented all the Virginia Tech findings because it's the right thing to do. I don't think this bill is the right thing to do. And on a final note, I was born and raised in Priest River. Fourth generation native. I'm no stranger to Idaho. I'm no stranger to owning a gun and using one. I am Idaho's rank and file. I'm Idaho's rank and file, and I don't think you should pass this bill forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there questions? Representative Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Kevin. Article 1, Section 11 of the Constitution. And, Mr. Chairman, with permission, may I read?
Always from the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Says Article 1, Section 11, right to bear and keep arms. The people have the right to keep and bear arms, which right shall not be abridged. But the provision shall not prevent the passage of laws to govern the carrying of weapons concealed on the person, nor prevent the passage of legislation, etc. So where I'm struggling in reading that portion of the Constitution, does it not allow the universities to set up some restrictions as to where or where not individuals may carry a concealed weapon?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crane. Right now, under current law, the legislature has, some argue delegated, some argue just authorized, the State Board of Education and the universities to regulate in that area. The current legislation moves that language into paren 1, but then in paren 2 takes it away with regard to anyone who has one of those two licenses. So with regard to one of those two licenses, no, there won't be authority to regulate that. I think that fits your question, but if not, I could.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Kevin, if I understood your testimony, you were concerned about potentially setting the university up for a lawsuit because we would say that it could be in certain venues and not allowed in other venues. But as I read the Constitution, I think there is room inside there in Article 1, Section 11 that allows us to do that. Is that correct?
Mr. Satterlee.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crane, I'm not sure if I understand your question, so I don't want to misanswer it. What I think, though, is that the immunity provision in terms of what sets us up to make that change is where part of this problem arises from. Here's what I think. The statute says, the bill, as written, says the universities can regulate firearms on the campuses. I agree with that. Then it says, however, that regulation cannot extend to the holders of one of those two licenses. That's where the problem will lie, is that one of those two licenses cannot be regulated.
Thank you.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Satterlee. When there is litigation, what would be the effect of your rules and that you had in place, which are being litigated? Would they have to be suspended for a period of time during the pendency of the lawsuit and possible appeal?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, good question, one that I don't know that I could properly answer. And different members of the judiciary might issue whichever order. The answer is I don't think they would be suspended. Most likely they would remain in place. They do currently have the force and effect of the statutory enabling, allowing the state board to do that. They would have the force and effect of the state board taking those actions. I doubt that they would be suspended pending the litigation.
Further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.